Coogs House. The Houston Cougars are in the news for good reasons as of late. There's some funny stuff happening in college football that we have to take a second to laugh at. And I'm weirdly concerned now that Dana Holgorsen and I have the same guilty pleasure.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach, Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater can't stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way we can get the latest on the Cougs into your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. And welcome back to the YouTube channel. If that is where you found us today, it's good to see you again. Remember, we are doing a giveaway every 250 subscribers at 1,500, and we are getting close. We're going to give away the hat, or a hat like the one, a new version of a new hat of the one I have on, not the one that I sweat in, a new one with the Cougar on the front and the Locked On logo on the side. We're approaching that rapidly, so make sure you subscribe so we get there, and comment down below to let us know that you're in the contest. If after laughing at some folks, maybe including myself, you are wondering what to say, you're kind of at a loss of what to say, tell us if pineapple goes on pizza. All right, so today we're going to do a couple different things. We're going to start off with some good news in Cougars getting nominated for awards. A handful of people recognized and nominated for things. Talk kind of about what that means to the program as a whole. Second segment, want to laugh at some folks about some things. We'll laugh, I hope. And then third and final segment, I want to talk about one of the funnier things to come out about Big 12 coaches, including our own Dana Holgorsen on Wednesday. But first, let's jump on in and talk about the big set of nominations that came out on Wednesday was Reese's Senior Bowl. So the Senior Bowl is sponsored by Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. I probably should have had a question about peanut butter cups. Anyway, peanut butter cups, Reese's Senior Bowl. They have a Senior Bowl every year. Clayton Tune and Tank Dell playing it last year. It's a big step up for guys to get drafted because you're performing for pro coaches at the end of the college football season as a senior, draft eligible, those kind of things. Houston had 6 guys named to the 2024 watch list. Defensive linemen Nelson Caesar and Chidozie Nwankwo, both nominated. David Agwegbu, who is a linebacker / edge, I might call him a defensive end by the time the season's over, he was nominated. Also on the defense, Malik Fleming, the transfer in from East Carolina, defensive back, first year in Houston, but he is nominated. And the offense, the 2 offensive linemen, Jack Freeman and Patrick Paul, were both nominated. That is 6 guys that, if they get that opportunity, will have a leg up in getting drafted. You see more and more guys from that game get drafted than seniors that were not in that game. So being on the big list, I think, means people kind of see the potential in each of those guys as they continue to whittle that thing down. They're not the only guys that have been recognized and given awards since the last time we talked. For what it's worth, like Matthew Golden was nominated to the Tyler Campbell Rose Award, right, where someone in the state of Texas, best player in the state of Texas, and things like that. We've had a number of different guys kind of get nominated for these kinds of things. The Reese's Senior Bowl is a little bit bigger deal because of the implications of potentially going pro afterwards in the NFL draft, those kinds of things. It's not that every senior that gets drafted played in the Reese's Senior Bowl, but it's a very high percentage, right? And so that's important for that. What's important to also keep in mind is having 6 guys named to this list kind of makes Houston feel like one of the big boys. Now, there are a number of schools that had double digits. Alabama had 10 guys. Other SEC schools like Kentucky and Arkansas had 11 and 12 each. South Carolina had 15 guys nominated. Washington State even had 6 as well, kind of like Houston did. Texas had 12. Tennessee had 19. A lot of schools had a lot of guys, I should say. Ohio State has 12. What I think is interesting about Houston having 6 is a lot of the schools with more than 6 have been Power 5 programs for a long time. So on the one hand, you got to keep in mind that, like, that's kind of the direction this program is going to continue to grow. We're going to have 6, and then we'll have 8, and then we'll have 10, and then we'll be the same big boys as everyone else. This is a natural progression in that step, right? The second thing I'll say is that I think most people look at Houston and outside of the offensive line see a very, very young football team, right? Your receiving core is going to be led by Matthew Golden, a sophomore, and you're hoping to get production out of some of your freshmen and then some of the juniors somewhere there in between, right? You're also looking at this team with a bunch of running backs, again, not super senior laden. Your quarterback's a transfer in Donovan Smith, and he's not a senior either. You've got 2 years with him at least, right? You're thinking you got 2 years with him. I think I should say not at least, but you're thinking you have 2 years with him. On the defensive side of the ball, we have a ton of new names in the defensive backfield. Many of them also younger guys, right? AJ Halsey will make an impact this year, I promise. Juwan Gass will make an impact this year, I promise. Those kinds of guys are in their first year on campus. Halsey is a sophomore, and I believe by technical terms, Gaston is a junior, but I could be off by a year. He could also be a sophomore if I'm miscounting his COVID year. Double check that for me. I say that to say that as a young team, Houston having 6 guys make this cut is impressive. Those 6 guys all deserve it. I don't mean to say that they don't. I just think it's important to recognize that, like, this is a positive step for the program in this direction. We'll be tracking this over the course of the year, seeing as lists come out, seeing how this goes. Again, this is the season list is a long, long list. However, it is the kind of list that I think means that people have eyes on Houston, maybe more so than the average national fan. When you see things like the FanDuel over-under odds for the season set at 4.5 games, that's because Vegas is making money on people not paying attention to Houston, when we both know that when you look at their schedule and roster, that honestly, that's kind of low, right? Like they have things working in their favor, the people that are watching this. There are other guys that have earned some like honors that are like magazine type things, like Dave Campbell gave Michaela Harrison Pilot the preseason biggest true freshman impact. I mean, they're assuming he's going to have the biggest impact on a true freshman this season. AJ Halsey was a Phil Steele preseason 4th team All Big 12 as a sophomore that's new to the Big 12. I think that's worth pointing out too. Alex Hogan was named potential comeback player of the year on that kind of a watch list, right? So some of these guys are getting those kinds of honors too. I'm putting extra weight on the Reese's Senior Bowl because of a number of different things, right? That's admittedly my bias. If you got something that you think that we should discuss more, tell us in the comments down below. Tell us what you think needs to happen as far as recognition of Coogs go, or a recognition you may have heard that you think we've talked about enough on the show. Now, I want to talk about something that made me laugh, and then I hope you understand how it makes you laugh in college football. That does maybe peripherally touch Houston as far as like the Big 12 and U of H go. And maybe we'll get to that connection at some point, but I think it's mostly funny. It's mostly a chance for us to laugh as Houston Cougar fans. But first, we do need to talk some about eBay Motors, because if you're trying to build a championship team, you make sure that all the parts fit together, and you have to do that at eBay Motors, because for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is the perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need your parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors with eBay Guaranteed Fit. You can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to my garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back, because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop at eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's Ride eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. All right, now we need to take a moment to laugh some at our partners, former American Athletic Conference partners, up the road, up I-45, because latest news out of the ACC is getting really funny. Now, I do think this preferentially Peripherally, I can speak, I promise. Listen, I'm a teacher and coach. It's the start of the school year. Days get long. But peripherally, this does tie to Houston, the Big 12. And I think I want to get back to that by the second half of the segment here. But the ACC, the reports are ramping up about them adding Stanford, Cal, and one SMU, Southern Methodist University. They currently have 15 member schools in football. They have 15 member schools in total, I should say. One of them being the Notre Dame thing where they don't play football in the conference, right? And the theory would be that if they can get to an odd number, then there's some talk on more message boardy type things, but like, the odd number will put some pressure on Notre Dame to join as a football member or whatever. Maybe. I think the real deal here is that they're looking to maybe expand their TV market after they're saying kind of what Brett Yormark and the Big 12 are doing and what they're saying the Big 10 do as well. But ACC presidents are meeting this week. They're discussing finances about how to get this done. It does seem like the wheels are turning at kind of the same kind of pace July went for the Big 12 in adding Colorado, and then very quickly after that, Arizona State, and Utah. I say that to say that this feels like the kind of thing that once one of those three, Stanford, Cal, SMU, commits to join the conference, you'll hear of the other two very quickly. I imagine Stanford and Cal probably go together, right? The interesting thing about this, Stanford and Cal, it looks like, might in the first part of their time in the conference not get full shares, but get large shares, and certainly larger shares than the Pac-4 would have gotten them, right? SMU will get no shares. SMU is leaning on donor and booster money to make up for it. And while the ESPN pro rata clause will help cover adding Power 5 opponents, it won't help the SMU bit. But SMU is going to have money funneled in from wealthy alums to cover what Brett McMurphy of ESPN has reported maybe up to 7 years of media expenses or media coverage, right? 7 years. For reference as to how long that is, the Big 12 and Houston will have another Brett Yormark negotiated deal before that is over. This is hilarious. This is a time to laugh at the SMU folks, because what's happening here is after having the boat passed over them twice in a dozen years with the Big 12, SMU is feeling desperate, and they need something to happen. They need to move in the Power 5. They get left behind in the state of Texas. And frankly, that boat may have already sailed. The ship has sailed. The ship may have already sailed. Now, in looking at what SMU is doing, and I promise I'm going to tie this back to Houston, the Big 12, at some point. Trust me. But in looking at what they're doing, SMU is trying to figure out some way to get a seat at the table, ticket to the dance, etc. And they're willing to go into their wealthy alumni pockets to do it. What's interesting is, and I actually laughed, someone on Twitter replied to me with this as well, SMU could have been donating that money and building the equivalent of the Power 5. They could have built something like the Fertitta Center. They could have put expansions on TDEC, like something like how we did with TDEC. They could have done all that with that money in the last dozen years and maybe have been in a better spot at this point. Instead, Houston did, and Houston got the nod. Now, there's a couple other things I think that play in this. The Big 12 feels like they've got the DFW market with Fort Worth and TCU. I will say I do understand that there is some difference between Dallas and Fort Worth in that market, and SMU is a very different Dallas even than most of Dallas, but Fort Worth and TCU is also somewhat different than Dallas to me. But the more valuable thing to the Big 12 was to get the Houston market. Brett Yormark said as much at Big 12 Media Days, right? The other thing I think that is interesting about this as it ties to Houston is kind of twofold. One, if Stanford and Cal go to the ACC, that does leave two former Power 5 teams in two new states somewhat homeless. as the college football playoff and March Madness. People are starting to talk about it as a Power Four anyway. You could see those two schools make pleas to join the Big 12. We know that Yormark has already gotten granted the ability to extend this thing to 18 teams. So theoretically, those could be teams 17 and 18 if there's officially no more pack. You could also see maybe don't have to pay them the full thing right away out the gates because they're getting a little bit more desperate maybe than they would have been 2 months ago, right? The other thing I think this has to do with Houston, the Big 12, is what this essentially will do, and this is a little bit bigger picture here, but the ACC expanding may actually be problematic for that conference in the longest of long runs, right? Florida State is not going to get a big financial bump by adding SMU to their conference. They're just not. All it adds is every so often a little bit further road trip than anything else in the ACC would have been, right? Now, we already know the Florida States and the Clemsons of the world are upset. We also know that they're not exactly eager to share their TV dollars with Stanford, Cal, and SMU to the degree they will have to. We also know that they joined the ACC intentionally to not have to go to West Coast games. The idea of playing all the way across the country in a late night game is a major advantage for those schools in football. And then, frankly, in other sports too, but certainly in football, which drives the money, which drives this whole thing. Adding those three schools feels like a potential safety blanket for losing 2 or 3 schools of their own in the ACC. And I wonder, and I think it's worth pondering, if the ACC adds the 3 schools and it upsets the key powers in this whole thing. Florida State, Clemson. I consider Miami to be one, although they're private schools, their finances are a little bit different. You may think it's Virginia or Carolina, what have you, right? But Florida State and Clemson for sure. Upsetting those 2 schools and then potentially causing some sort of a friction within the conference, right, could lead to more schools splintering from that conference and could lead to more expansion of the Big 12 with schools that were not in financial trouble. They just went out of the ACC. That ACC deal is horrific. That is way too long-term a deal. The TV dollars continue to go up, and that deal remains the same over the course of more than a decade. That's a problem, right? So you could see how those things would shift. The other thing I want to point out here in looking at this is that if you're Houston in the Big 12, that does mean that Brett Yormark, someone has to play a waiting game. Like, do you wait to see what happens with that? Do you wait to see, or do you just go in and jump with Oregon State, Washington, etc.? The last and final thing I'll say is that this is all possible because the conference just needs 12 of the 15 members to vote yes to add new members. So you don't have to have a yes from Florida State to add Stanford, Cal, and SMU. You don't have to have a yes from Clemson to add Stanford, Cal, and SMU. And so in adding those schools, you can successfully add them and successfully piss off your moneymakers. And that's how this thing spirals to me. This is only peripherally tied to Houston, so we'll be following it somewhat as it unfolds. I do think it's funny to watch SMU pay their way into a conference. And by pay their way into, I mean pay their way for a really, really long time into a Power 5 conference. However, while I enjoy laughing at that, I think that we'll continue to laugh at that from afar as it goes. But that's the latest and something I thought we had to chuckle at. Something I think you may chuckle at is going to come up in segment 3. News came out about Dana Holgorsen that made me a little bit concerned about myself. But I do have to say one thing first before we get to that. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Now, if you've benefited from therapy, feel free to tell us in the comments down below if that's what you're comfortable doing. If you are not comfortable doing that, obviously, or you're kind of looking for what's going on with this thing? What are people talking about? This is the one we're trying to make make sure you know that is okay. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to fit your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. Switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnCollege today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnCollege. BetterHelp. Get it now. All right. I want to talk some about this news that came out on Dana and several other Big 12 coaches. So, Brett McMurphy, aforementioned Brett McMurphy of the Action Network. I think I said ESPN. That's a mistake. Do I still get credit with the mistake if I corrected it in show? No. Okay. Well, Brett McMurphy's the Action Network, but he went around and discovered every Big 12 coach, the current Big 12 for this fall, Big 12 coaches' favorite musical artist. Dana Holgorsen, our beloved Dana Holgorsen, said that his favorite artist is Post Malone. And I said on Twitter I was going to do a whole segment of this because, honestly, I'm not anti-Post Malone. There, I said it. I'm not anti-Post Malone. I consider Post Malone somewhat of a guilty pleasure. His last album, entitled Austin, has some songs I listen to probably too frequently. I'll go ahead and say it. Yep, I said it. I said it out loud. I said it right there. I don't think he's that bad. I do think he's very poppy. I think he's very appeals to a certain audience that makes him my guilty pleasure and not something I'm just like wearing on my chest all the time. But he's an interesting guy, and he did catch me once upon a time with song White Iverson a long time ago. Now, with that said, Dana Holgorsen listening to Post Malone is just weird to me. And I don't mean to stereotype Iowa Wesleyan and the small town. Like, I just didn't know Post Malone had that kind of cachet in those kind of small towns. Yeah. I didn't know that was how that goes. Anyway, but I can't imagine Dana Holgorsen listening to Post Malone. Dana, if you hear this, come on show sometime. Let's talk Post Malone. I'd love to know more about what you think about his music, what you like about his music, etc. We talk about him. We talk about Leach and the Air Raid. We don't have to. We talk Red Bull. Other guilty pleasure of mine. I drink way too much caffeine in a day. That's probably why I talk really fast. Anyway, but Dana, come on, we'll talk about all things not Houston Cougar football if you like, because I am interested. Now, I will say that while that made me feel some kind of way about my own guilty pleasure of Post Malone, that was not the weirdest name listed on these 14 coaches' favorite musicians. First of all, can we get one thing off the bat? UT Austin had head coach Steve Sarkisian said his favorite musical artist is Tupac. Tupac is great. Tupac is a fantastic rapper. Again, one of the greatest rappers of all time. That sounds horribly fake to me. Does that sound horribly fake to you? It sounds horribly fake to me. Sarkisian seems the kind of guy that is very image conscious. Frankly, in this, I picked this up at Media Day a little bit. It was, a little bit of humble bragging here and there. I very, very, very image conscious. His wife is a Instagram influencer and all those kinds of things, right? Steve Sarkisian picking Tupac is like someone said, "Hey, pick a rapper." So, Tupac, right? Like, it just insert rapper here. I don't know that he could. Maybe he's a Giant fan. Right? It's about the right time period and those kinds of things. And Tupac is one of the greatest rappers of all time. It just feels like Sarkisian was like, "I need to insert a rapper here to make sure I look cool to the young folks." Tupac Shakur is a good rapper. Tupac is the one I'm going with, right? And that made me laugh and chuckle. But it was not the one that made me laugh and chuckle the most. BYU, Brigham Young University, associated with the Church of Latter-day Saints, Mormonism, is head coached by Kalani Sitake. I think I said that correctly. If I did not, I'm sorry. But BYU observes all Mormon traditions. And as people of LDS faith, there's some things they do and don't do. Coach Sitake mentioned his favorite musician is Bob Marley. Yes, that Bob Marley. I can only imagine how that news is going over on that campus. If you have similar thoughts, other jokes, or you saw this list as well and had other people to chuckle at. I mean, Lance Leipold and Kenny Chesney kind of made some more sense. Mike Gundy and Prince was an interesting pairing, but I weirdly kind of see it, Neil Brown and Zach Bryan, Gus Malzahn in the car. So some of these things made sense to me. So if you got one that you want to chuckle at, tell me in the comments down below. Again, thank you all so much for tuning into Locked On Cougs today. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.